If you automate your own job away, it's the ideal situation, and don't tell your boss. And then I would say there's two things that could happen. Either one is you could be lazier, right? Like you could just work less, and that's fine, if people want to do that. But the other side is that you could actually work more. You could do more interesting stuff because now the hard part is done for you. I don't think it's going to decrease the amount of originality in the world. I think if anything, it's going to explode it because you're going to have all these people with more time on their hands to come up with interesting things.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. Today, I'm sitting down with Michael Taylor. Michael is the CEO and co-founder of Rally, an AI audience simulation platform, which allows marketers to run synthetic focus groups. Super exciting. We're going to get into that today. Before founding Rally, Michael co-founded Ladder, which is a 50-person growth marketing agency, as well as Vex Power, a simulation-based learning platform for marketers. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Yeah, good to be here.
When did you first start experimenting with AI in marketing? And did you see the value immediately, or were you like, it could be something and over time grew in value?
I'm an optimist, and so I saw the value even when it was terrible and didn't work very well. But it has caught up much quicker than I expected. So even before I left Ladder, we were experimenting with like Google AI kind of like image classification stuff. So this is like
like machine learning,
generative GP. Yeah, it was. Yeah, so this was like basically you could feed it images and it would classify what was in the image. And I thought that was magic. And now you can do that like out of the box with ChatGPT, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, at the time we were using it to classify our ads, and we were running a ton of Facebook ads, like thousands of Facebook ads per client. We were like tagging, images with men in them perform 12% better than images with women in them, and things like that. So yeah, we were like, I was a very high AI enthusiast, but I made two major mistakes. One was I was like, I'm not smart enough to work in this field, even though I would love to. Like, at the time I was thinking I would love to like just go do a PhD, but I don't even think I'd get in. And then the other thing was I'd love to work on this, like even, just selling it, right? And like, maybe doing like an AI startup, but it's going to be like 10, 20 years before it's useful. And I was wrong on both counts.
I love that first one because I think it is something that is very common to the human experience. We see something like, oh, that's too hard. I would need to get a degree. I would need to go down some long journey before I try this difficult thing. Whereas the reality is most of the time, accepting a few things like maybe a surgeon, I hope, does get a degree and go through a journey. But for most things, you can just dive in and learn on the job. Like for myself, I learned SQL when I started working in a job that required SQL, and now I know it quite well. But going into that job, I didn't really know it at all. How would you recommend someone think about this in retrospect? How should someone get started in AI today if they feel like they don't have the know-how?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first thing that you need to do is live in the future. So like, do you know the quote?
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I know, but it is actually easier to do than to say. It's the quote that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed, I think is really true. So when I go to San Francisco, like I don't live in the States. I live in England near Liverpool. And we're like 5 years behind AI here, right? So I try and go to London, I try and go to San Francisco, go to New York, where the people are building this stuff on the cutting edge. Their products aren't ready for mainstream yet, and like the average person here in Liverpool, like when I get a taxi, like the taxi driver, wouldn't know how to use deep research, right, or wouldn't have a use for it right now. But like when I was in San Francisco. At the end of the year, people were talking about like, hey, there's this kind of new form factor that you can use, and they were showing me Storm, like the Stanford project, which was like the precursor for deep research. So I was like, when it came out, I was like really on top of it because I was like, okay, I know that this is going to be important, and because the people who are actually working in this field, really close to the metal are like saying that they're giving me the hype. So I think that's the trick is like, especially if you work remotely like I do, it's just like intentionally plan a couple of these trips a year where you can't just go soak up the vibes in somewhere where they're building the future and then bring that back to where you are.
That is so true because I live in Singapore and it is high tech in a lot of ways. But I went to San Francisco recently and the ads in the airport are talking about AGI, assuming everyone knows what that is. Whereas in Singapore, at least my friends mostly don't know what AGI is. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how these things are very sometimes geographically centered. Do you think it's necessary to travel to the sort of geographical centers, or is it possible to do this online through Twitter or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it depends what end of the diffusion curve you need to be on. And I'll explain that term because it's a nerdy thing to say. But I think about this in terms of alpha. So alpha is like, could you beat the market? I get there first. And when something's gone mainstream, there's no alpha left, right? Like everyone's doing it. So all of the profit you could have made from doing it has kind of been squeezed out by the major players. So if you get there slightly before that, then you can make money. Right. And this is kind of the way I think about businesses and like timing what topics to get into. So if you want to make a lot of money, you kind of need to get in just before it goes mainstream. But then if you want a lot of status, you need to get in before people are making money. So this is kind of how I think about it. You want to choose, like, do you want to be famous amongst nerdy crowds, which is like my particular goal, or do you want to make a bunch of money? So you can play the status game by being quite far into the future, or you can make the profit game by being just before mainstream. So with my first business, Ladder, I was playing the profit game, like growth hacking. I wasn't part of the initial set of growth hackers, right? There was Brian Balfour, there was Hiten Shah, and like all these people who were, Ryan Holiday. They were like really big into growth, and I was just reading their stuff, and they were high status to me. They gained a lot of status. But then I created a growth hacking agency, and then I made money from that, right? And then with AI, I've been a little bit different. Like I got into AI when there was no way to make money, at least for me. Like I wrote a blog post on prompt engineering in like 2022 when there wasn't like nobody was people were talking about it. The cool people were talking about it. The high status people were talking about it. But I couldn't sell training. I couldn't sell my course. Like I couldn't I like most AI products weren't making any money at that time. So I think about where you need the timing. So do you want to like what's your actual goal? And then once you know what your goal is, then you need to get as close as possible to the people who are building. So if you need to be just before mainstream, you don't have to go very deep into these communities. You can just kind of follow what's happening in the newsletters. And, you could like listen to Ben's Bytes email newsletter and just kind of, listen to people on podcasts and you'll get like pretty much everything you need to know. You don't have to dive very, very deep and you'll still be quite early compared to the average person. And if you want to go high status, though, I think you need to be where the builders are, where they don't actually share their secrets yet on podcasts because they're too good or they're too busy, right? And there are a few podcasts where you do get high alpha, like the Dwakesh podcast is really great for that. Because he's actually, he is in there, like he's actually in there with the builders, right? He's friends with them. So, I think that's pretty rare. And therefore you can get a lot more interesting insider information from someone when you're there in person. And then you can arbitrage that. So you can, I'll give you an example. When I was in San Francisco recently, I was talking to a guy and he was like, this is funny because nobody I knew back home had heard of Devin, which was like the $500 a month AI subscription where it's like a intern coder that like works on your code base without you having to prompt it. And just works in the background. And maybe still a lot of people haven't heard of it. But a lot of my friends back home were asking me whether the $20 a month ChatGPT subscription was worth it, right? And I saw this guy, I met this guy, and he was like, no, I've got Devin working on this feature, and then I've got like Windsurf working on this feature, and I've got Cursor open in another browser, and that's working on this feature. So he's already got like an army of AI agents working, and it was a real mess. Like I looked at his code base, and it was crazy, but that is the sort of thing that like I had heard of these things, but I hadn't tried them yet because I just didn't really have any conviction as to whether they would work or not. But I saw this guy doing it and that kind of led me. I was like, okay, the same next day, $500 subscription. And that's something that I wouldn't have done because I would have been too skeptical if I hadn't actually seen someone in person. So I think that's the benefit that you get.
Okay, quick sidebar. What is your review of Devin? Is it worth buying $500 or is it a...
Yeah, good question. I did cancel the subscription after a couple of months, specifically because it didn't work well for my use case. I think that it's worth doing just to understand how to build a good AI product, because I think that team is incredible. But for me specifically, because I'm not that great at coding myself, I'm like self-taught marketer who like learned how to code. I find I need to be like very deep into the code base where I can understand what's going on because I was there when it was coded. Whereas so Devin is better for like professional software developers where they're used to doing things like pull requests and going through the proper channels to deploy things and running tests and stuff. I would say if you don't have best practices set up in your code base already and you're not already used to working with another team member, then you might struggle.
That's a super insightful way to think about it. I'm curious, going back to the focus on status versus focus on money. I love the way that you frame this out as get in super early if you want the status, get in a bit later if you want to make the money. What would be the pros and cons, or like why would you choose status this time versus choosing money?
I would say everyone should choose money first because it just buys you your freedom, right? Like because I did the marketing agency, then I had a bunch of credibility when I left, and I actually didn't really make any money from the agency. I still have my shares; they're still going, but I just got like tired of basically burned out managing like 50 people. And my co-founder is still plugging away, and he's doing a great job, But it wasn't for me in the end. After 6 years, I kind of needed to do something different. Yeah, I mean, it's very intense. And we had like Fortune 500 clients as well as like early stage startups. And I was flying all around the world, like doing meetings and stuff. And for me, I wanted to get back to building. And when you're managing a team of 50 people, you're like managing people who manage other people. And you're just like very far away. It went from like people like early in the company, it went from people like begging me to help them on their campaigns because they're like, I really need your help. You're great at this. And that's good for my ego. But then as it developed, it got to the point where they're like, Mike, you really need to stop stepping in because you're just stepping on people's toes. And, and like the new people that we hired are intimidated because you're like, the COO, and like, why are you getting involved in their campaign? Like so you get to the point where you're like not even allowed to step in anymore. This was like before they invented founder mode. So I maybe I would have micromanaged a bit more if I heard that term. So I would say, once you make some money, like enough to buy a house, and I would say once you also get status from making money. So it's not like a clean divide between the two. Growing an agency and then like I could do consulting afterwards because I had some credibility. So I got to the point where I was working a couple of days a week, just consulting. And then I had the other days, just for doing my own thing. So I'd say like, you want to get to that first because then it gives you the freedom to really think creatively. But then you kind of get bored with just making money because there are a load of businesses where you can make a lot of money, but you won't enjoy it. And then there are businesses where like you would enjoy it a lot, but you won't make any money. And I would say that you can choose, like as you get more leverage in your career, you can choose what allocation you want between those two things. And for me, like the personal choice was, I was always fine with how much money I was making. I never really cared that much about, like, my life isn't going to get 10 times better if I make 10 times more money. But my life would get 10 times more better if I could work on, like, say, what I'm working on right now with Rally. That's like a personal choice that I've decided to trade money for like enjoyment.
That is so powerful. And I think it's something that, it's just so important. If we can spend our time sitting into the thing that is our calling, the thing that we're really good at and excited about, that's better for us and it's better for the whole world. We need more people who are sitting in that space. So the first part that you were concerned about was I can't learn AI. You solved that.
Yeah.
The second part was there won't be a good AI company for 20 years. You're now co-founder of an AI company.
Yeah.
Can you first explain to us, like, what is Rally and how should people think about it?
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely plug my tool. But on the first point, the really funny thing is that last year I published a book on AI for O'Reilly called Prompt Engineering for Generative AI. So that really cured the imposter syndrome. I learned how to code by reading O'Reilly books. So it was a real honor to get picked by them to write a book. And I wrote it with a co-author, James Phoenix, who is more technical than me. So he kind of made sure we were really sound. But it's funny that like you can just do things. The bar isn't as high as you'd think, right? Like Like a lot of the people who are doing the really interesting projects that you look up to, maybe like it's just like a couple of years of really focused work, because almost nobody focuses on anything. You can reach that bar.
And just a quick sidebar on that before we get into rally, I think the thing that I often miss and that people often miss is that last 20%. A lot of people do 80% of the work. Very few people do the last 20%. And it's that 20%, which can be like talking about your work, publishing your work, promoting your work. That is what gives 100% of the value in many cases. So push through for anyone listening. Do the rest of the work.
Exactly. And that's a big lesson I learned at Ladder as well. Like we had a popular blog, and it was because I just forced myself. I literally took 20% of my time and said, I'm just going to be blogging 1 day a week, and I'm just going to be writing up the stuff that we did. And that drove 60% of our leads as an agency.
Wow.
Yeah. Wait, so I took that to heart. Yeah.
I'd love to sidebar on that really quickly. Prioritization. Because something like back when I was in high school, I did a blog, and what I found very quickly was it fills up all of your time, and then you can't do more experiments because you need to, especially when it's like blogging or even podcasting like this, you need to create more content, or else the whole thing fails. It's not like a business where you build the code and then it continues running without you. You have to keep making more and new every time just to stay in the same place. Yeah. How do you think about prioritization, or maybe back at that time at Ladder, how did you think about prioritization to balance between, I'm going to spend a day every week focused on the blog, or try something new? Yeah,
it's a good question. I would say I either approach it one of two ways. Either one is I let it naturally load balance, like in some degree, like even if you didn't really care about prioritization, you would find a natural balance, because if you didn't blog enough, you wouldn't have enough clients, and then you'd have more spare time to blog, right? But if you blog too much, then you'd have too many clients and you'd have no time left to blog. I would say it does kind of balance it out. But then the other thing I do is I just set myself like a dumb goal, like a caveman goal is what I call it, is I go to caveman mode. So I'm like to write the book, I was like, every Monday is book day. It's the only thing I'm allowed to do on Mondays, and I could sit there and do nothing, but I'm not allowed to do anything else. And I have to trick myself with these dumb rules, because otherwise I like overthink stuff, and I'm like, I need to, maybe I'll work on this. So maybe if I just promote this, then it'll help make the book easier. And it's all like me just, fooling myself. I think sometimes you just need to set a dumb rule of like, no, like Monday is writing day or whatever, and if you set that, like, it doesn't have to be precisely correct, right? Like maybe you should have been spending 25% of your time or 15% of your time. It doesn't really matter. Then what matters is like the consistent, I'm going to just do it every week.
Love that. There's a quote, I don't know if it's by Tim Ferriss or something he was quoting someone else, but the quote that stuck with me is, what is the one thing you can do that makes everything else irrelevant or easier? Yes. Because to your point, it's so often easy to be like, oh, I need to write this book, but what I really need to do first is like design the cover another time, or maybe do a little bit more of like talking to someone over a coffee to make sure I'm going in the right direction, and avoid the thing that really matters. But if you can say, okay, the thing that really matters is I need to write down at the first chapter today, then you can just knock that out, and suddenly everything else falls into place.
Yeah, exactly. And once you're doing, like, once you've done your homework for the day, once I've done the book on Monday, then I allow myself to squirm and kind of come up with other excuses for the rest of the week.
Yeah, you buy your freedom. Okay, exactly. Getting into Rally, cool. What led you to Rally, and what is Rally?
Yeah, so as a prompt engineer, like as someone who's working with AI, and like I was helping people build AI applications. Maybe I should explain a little bit what a prompt engineer is, because people are still not 100% sure, but it's a made up job title, like growth hacker, where you to sound cool to get you more clients. The day to day of what I'm doing is I'm like helping people who have built AI tools make sure that it works more often, because AI is inherently non-deterministic. So, if you ask it the same thing 100 times, you maybe get like 60 different answers and like 40 duplicates. So what my work was quite often setting a metric to like evaluate what works, what didn't work, like what does good look like, right? And quite often what I found was the easiest way to check whether an AI response was good or not was to train another AI to tell me to be the judge, right? To tell me whether that was a good response or not. And so if you train a judge that agrees with a human, so like I'd work with a domain expert, we'd come up with a bunch of tests and say, okay, this is what we think is a good answer, this is what we think is a bad answer. As long as the judge agrees with the human, then you can use that judge to run A/B tests on the AI. So kind of roundabout way of telling the story, but what that made me realize is that AI is quite often very good at like telling whether you've done a good job or not, even if the AI itself isn't good at doing that job. And it makes sense because it's also true for humans, right? We don't, art critics can tell you exactly what was good or bad about an art piece, but they might not be able to create that art themselves. So it is just a fundamentally easier job. And so it makes sense that they would be better at that. So I was actively thinking about, okay, well, what do I do with this knowledge? Like, what can I build that would take advantage of this? And what I kind of jumped to eventually was I wanted to make a Facebook ads game. And this is like pretty random. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I could spin up like 100 instances of ChatGPT, right? You think about it this way, like imagine 100 ChatGPT sessions. And in each one, I'm going to tell it a different persona to adopt. So I'll say, you are, a 40-year-old dad from Liverpool, and then you are like a 18-year-old like woman from LA, and if you give all these different personalities to the different LLMs, then they're gonna answer very differently when I say, here's my Facebook ad, like, would you click on this? So my thinking was, if I spin up a good audience, then I can get the LLMs to decide whether they'll click. And then that could be what powers my Facebook ad game. And then I talked to a few advisors and they told me that was the stupidest idea they'd ever heard. And nobody apart from me is nerdy enough to want to play a Facebook ad game. But like they wanted access to the script. They wanted to be able to like run some questions themselves against these LLMs. Like, what should I change about this Facebook ad? Like, I'm using this word, like, is this the right word to use? And kind of ask their audience questions. So I turned that script into like a front end kind of prototype, and then, came up with the name Rally. And that's what it is today. It's basically like, you're talking to ChatGPT, but you're talking to 100 ChatGPTs at once. And they're all kind of crowdsourcing the feedback to the questions that you ask.
Which is brilliant and very exciting. Because for anyone, like a lot of people listening probably have run research themselves. For anyone who hasn't, it's often very expensive, very hard to find
tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, it takes like weeks or months to recruit people, and even then you're like recruiting people who have like they're willing to like take the afternoon off for an Amazon gift card, right? So it's not necessarily representative of like your real customer base.
There's a bias, there's a cost, there's a time cost as well as a money cost. Whereas this solution allows you to just ask very, very quickly, which I guess solves two things. One is you can ask for more things that otherwise wouldn't sort of meet the bright line for, okay, I'm going to spend money on a focus group. And the second is, of course, you can move faster. How is the accuracy?
Yeah, good question. That's like the number one thing I'm working on. Actually, yesterday I was running an experiment. It'll be in my next post on Every. So I do like a monthly column for them. So yeah,
which is fantastic, by the way. I was reading some of your recent ones. Highly recommend.
So the last one,
listen.
The last one I did, I created this Hacker News simulator. Again, it's using Rally, right? It's using the same backend, but we just kind of on the front end made it look like Hacker News. You put in your headlines, and then it asks the AI audience whether they would click on those headlines. But you're in there amongst the real headlines for the day, so you get a good sense of whether you would get clicks or not. And so I wanted to test that and see how accurately does it predict viral headlines. And I found that actually it's about 60% accurate. So like it can today, like, if you give it two headlines, one didn't go viral and one did go viral, it will pick the viral one about 60% of the time, right? So it's not like amazing accuracy for predicting behavior, but what we have found is that the comments are like spot on. So when the LLMs are deciding what headlines to click on or to upvote, we capture their inner thoughts. Like we get them to think through the decision first, and then we conspire that. So we summarize that into topics, and then I went and summarized the real comments that people actually left on Hacker News on those headlines. And they were basically the same. That I think that's where the value is like kind of understanding like what would the audience think about this. I wouldn't say LLMs are there yet in terms of actually predicting behavior in a statistically significant way, but they are already there in terms of like understanding what objections would people have to this headline. What would they be thinking when they decided whether to click on this? And I think that's where the value is in these sorts of tools right now.
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation.
It's interesting. And it makes me think that when you're running research with real humans, stated behavior often is not really the same as their actual behavior anyway.
Yeah.
They may say, this is the thing I'll click on, but then they don't actually click on it. I wonder if you were, just to get nerdy for a minute, if you were to bring in like max diff or conjoint approaches, whether that could allow you to, similar to how you try to better assess accuracy of human responses, it might allow the AI to also provide more helpful responses on predicted behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have high hopes of that, because at the end of the day, we're finding that LLMs are basically like human brain simulators, right? Like they've been trained on how we think, from the internet and how we talk. So it just makes sense that like in order to predict what the next word is in the sentence, they have to have some sort of world model of like how humans think. They're not like perfect simulators, right? Like as we can see, it's only 60% accuracy. I think the high watermark is there was a paper that a lot of the people in the space reference where they did a 2-hour interview with 1,000 people, and that 2-hour interview was enough to predict 85% of their survey responses using an LLM. So I think that's, and the funny thing actually is that's the same accuracy you would get if you asked the same person twice. So if I surveyed you today, and then I surveyed you next month, you would only agree with about 85% of the things you said last month.
Which is
right?
reasonable. Yeah. I definitely would not agree with everything I say today.
There you go. So yeah, I think that's, that's where it is. Yeah, I think exactly. Yeah, we are more predictable than we think, but all of life is in that last 15%,
True. That's a very good point. And it's interesting that a lot of the juicy stuff coming out of it today is the qualitative side, which is true for a lot of focus groups as well. And not only are you then generating that commentary, but you're also able to use AI to digest the commentary more effectively. I'd love to go back to something you were saying earlier about prompting. For someone who may be listening and is like, hey, all this AI stuff sounds cool, but I don't know where to even begin. Yeah. What is the difference in output between a good prompt and a bad prompt?
Yeah, good question. It's always subjective is what I'm finding. Like the big model providers like Google and OpenAI, they have what they call benchmarks, where they will say, for example, they'll give it 1,000 grade school math problems and see if it can answer them correctly. And those benchmarks are really useful to tell how smart the model is getting, but they don't really map to real world use cases. So you usually have to design your own benchmarks, and that requires deeply understanding what it is that you're trying to get out of your task. So at a very simple basis, like what you need to do is introspect, like to think about what am I expecting here? Like, what do I actually want out of this? And then once you have a goal in mind of like, what is a good answer? What is a bad answer for this task? Then it's about understanding what context does the AI need in the prompt in order to do that task. And the way I like to think about it is if I just hired an intern who, passed the bar exam, right? Like a GPT-4o can pass the bar exam, but they don't have any like real world experience. So they're not great at making like value judgments. They understand all of the books in the world, but they haven't used them yet. Then what information would that person need to get subjectively the right answer? Because when I ask it to write a blog post, I'm looking for something very differently than say what you would want out of a blog post. Like you have a different brand style, you have different things that you like to see in a blog post. Like maybe I'm more stats heavy, or maybe you are, and all of that stuff is subjective. Like it's just a guess, right? Like it's a guess as to like what that aligns with our preferences. And so to be good at prompt engineering, you don't necessarily need to know all of the tactics and techniques and stuff. You really just need to, be a good manager, essentially, like write a good brief for the model.
Which that I think is often a really helpful analogy, that it is very much like managing. If you have an employee, you don't tell the employee, make a blog post, but you explain, here's why I want in the blog post, here's what I want it to look like, here's some examples that you can reference. And then the employee can do it. No employee can read my mind, and no AI yet can read my mind either.
Not just yet. Yeah, but it's only going to get more. The analogy is only going to get more useful, because as these models get smarter, they're going to get to the point where like they can handle every type of task that a human could handle, and that's like some people like use that as the definition for AGI. Like when one of these tools is like good enough to do every task that a human would normally do. But the hope for us is that so far what I found is that LLMs are just not great at coming up with creative solutions to problems that are subjective in nature. So, for example, when I'm writing code with LLMs, very, very good at coming up with a plan, like the architecture, like data architecture. Like, here's how you should design your database for this type of app. Here are the different pages you need in this app, right? And I was vibe coding last night. I built an Uno game for my daughter, because she's 5, and she and she loves playing Uno. She wanted to play on her iPad, and the game is poison, basically. I told them that she was 5, and they still shove tons of ads in her face. Like, they're trying to get her, like, keeps coming up with the credit card page, because like she'll try and click on something, and then it'll say like, oh yeah, buy this. And then there's like a chat function as well. Like, so when you're playing with strangers, like they can just chat, and there's no way to disable it. So I was like, this is absolutely terrible. And I had to like ban her from using it. But I was like, okay, well, it's 2025. So I spun up Cursor, and I built the whole thing in 2 hours. Right.
Wow.
And it's incredible. And I didn't even look at the code. Right. So like, I know how to code, but I didn't even need to look at the code. And there's some bugs in it. Right. But it's working, and it's a single use. Right. It's just for my daughter. But the funny thing is that it is great when you tell it what to do. Like, I want it to work this way. It is great at following those instructions. And it's great for coming up with a plan. Like, it came up with the architecture. It told me what libraries to use to build it, because I don't know anything about game dev. But what it's really, really terrible at is that middle. I call it the NCO curse, right? So in the army, you have like the officers who make the plans, and you have the soldiers who execute. You need, like, the backbone of the army is the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers. They're like, they're running a specific unit, because they're the ones that are on the battlefield, and they have to kind of make a decision. Like, and a lot of these small decisions really add up to big, big wins. And I think that's what your role is as a human now with these AI tools. It's like being in the guts of it, where you're like a product manager. You're kind of not to conflate product management with being in the army, because it's very different. But like, you're making the same sort of creative decisions. It's not a master strategy. It's not that creative, but it's also a little bit more creative than just like, hey, follow this tutorial. It's like, choosing, like, making those subjective opinions. So like, I was choosing what sounds to would happen in different things. And like, some of the sounds were like really terrible, and I know that would annoy my daughter, right? So, audience of one, but I had a really good model in my mind as to what my daughter would like, and it was very different from what the AI produced, right? So that was my value in that equation, was like changing the different sounds, the things she would like, looking at it and going, those buttons are like too big, and these buttons are too small, and they seem like small decisions, but it took the game from being like, Uno, which has its own kind of design flaws in the app, to being something that's like unique for my daughter, because I understand her really well. And I think that, that really, the reason I use that example is it plays really well with, how we do our job, like our day jobs in terms of growth, or, being an entrepreneur. Is like, that's where your value is as a human. It's like having those subjective experiences, understanding taste, understanding vibes, going out into the world and like meeting people and kind of understanding them deeply, understanding the culture, because then you can kind of be that middleman and like, actually kind of, give the soldiers the instructions of what to do to solve the commander's intent, right? Like, maybe maybe you have an AI boss who tells you the overall strategy. Maybe you have AI minions that work underneath you, but I think you need to be there in the middle. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
That's such a great way of thinking about it. And I'd love to go deeper. So you said 2 hours, give or take, to build this application. What happened in those 2 hours? Like, maybe every 10 minutes, every 20 minutes, what were the major segments that you were doing?
Good question. Yeah, so I tried to do it as dumb as possible because I always like to break these tools and see where they fail. And I think that actually there's a mistake a lot of people make with prompt engineering is they actually maybe put too much effort in at first, and then it becomes not enjoyable for them. And I would say only put the effort in when it fails. So I just started with, and I am a prompt engineer, right? Like I read a book on it, but my first prompt was literally just make an Uno game for a 6-year-old.
I love it.
Yeah. So it's and it did a pretty decent job, but I could immediately see some things that were wrong with it. I wanted to like change the name so I don't get sued by Mattel or whatever. It's only for my daughter, but so I called it Eins, German for one, instead of Spanish for one. And then I didn't like the design, so I asked it to put like some cool animations with clouds, but then it was like already playable within like 15-20 minutes.
Wow. And playable as in like single player mode, I can play.
Yeah,
and the computer
as in
plays
like
with
it
me.
works in the browser. Yeah. So I could press I could type npm run and it worked in the browser. Yeah. So I would say a few things that made that easier. By the way, is like this doesn't require a database because she's not playing multiplayer. Like the computer is controlling the other player. So that is like one area where I see people getting stuck with vibe coding. Is that like when you do require like a database and you need it to like have authentication and kind of work in the cloud, that's a little bit of a harder lift.
I so much agree. Every time I've done a few of these projects, every time I get into the authentication, it takes like twice as long easily just to add authentication.
Exactly.
How would you deploy this? Like, is this on Replit or how did you put it out into the world?
Funnily enough, I just asked Claude and said, how do I deploy this? And it recommended Netlify drop, which I hadn't heard of, which is pretty cool. And all it is like you run npm build, and that creates like a static HTML folder of your application, and then you just literally just drag and drop that folder into Netlify, and it puts it live on the internet for free as well. Reminds me of the old days of like early on in programming where like you'd write some PHP and like it'd just be in a folder, and then you just drag the folder onto the FTP file, and then it's like live on it's just
back
like
to,
that.
Like WordPress days. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the good old days for Next.js.
True. Okay, I want to go deeper into prompt engineering because I've had a similar experience to what you're just describing, in that you know how to prompt engineer. You literally wrote the book on it, but then sometimes it's convenient to just write a short message. And for me, I think that's often because even if I know how to write a long prompt that's going to get me a maybe 20%, 30% better result, it's sometimes convenient to just get that 50% more quickly and then hone it further from there. If you were to write a really incredible prompt, what would be the skeleton of that?
Yeah. So in the book, we talk about the 5 principles of prompting. Usually I run them through in order, right? And I kind of use this as a checklist. And I tried to make this as simple as possible because it was, I realized when we went from GPT-3, which I was using a lot of, early on to GPT-4, suddenly like a bunch of the tricks and hacks that we needed to do just like didn't need to do anymore. And it actually reminded me a lot of the growth hacking space. Like early on in the growth hacking space, people were doing spam invites and they were doing all this kind of crazy stuff. And eventually it just became more about first principles. How do you kind of align the interests of the product with the interests of the users and build that basis for growth? And I think like, companies like Reforge, for example, if you do a Reforge course, they're like really good on this. And I feel like, we're going through the same shift here with prompting. A lot of the hacks and tricks and stuff have just kind of melted away. So the 5 principles that I found useful, one was giving direction. So the very first thing I try is like, do this in the style of this famous celebrity, or write this post in the style of Malcolm Gladwell, or write it in the style of Steve Jobs, things like that. That's like a kind of a shortcut to a vibe is the way I describe it. So usually I start with some sort of celebrity that enables us to get there quickly. But then if I do a bit more work on it, then I'll try and do what I call like unbundling, where I'd kind of say, okay, well, what do I like about Steve Jobs' writing style? And what do I not like about it? So if you ask it to give you bullet points of Steve Jobs' writing style, then you can delete some of those bullet points and say, now instead of saying write in the style of Steve Jobs, you would say write in the style of this style guide I just gave you. So that's kind of the first thing. And that solves most problems. And then format. So this is where like it gets a bit more technical, but quite often when you're doing prompt engineering specifically, like you're actually automating something. So I mean, you can prompt in ChatGPT all day, but like most of those prompts, like 80-90% of the time, you're never going to do that task again. So you don't need to really think very hard about structure. But if you are like doing something in Zapier, or you're writing a script, or, you know, building a product that uses AI, then you need to think about what format goes in, what format goes out, and then what format do I want in the middle. So you know, a simple example of this is a chain of thought where you would say, I want you to write a blog post, but first I want you to write the outline for the blog post. And so that's a formatting kind of decision. It's true for AIs, it's true for people. If they write the outline first, then the blog post is going to be much more comprehensive, right? So that's a good example. And quite often I'm putting things in there that are actual frameworks used by humans. Like I'll say, okay, I want you to use this framework from, you know, Rory Sutherland, like how he does his copywriting, or, you know, whatever it is. So I'll try and find like how do people do this task really well in the world, and like how they, like, what's their framework. Then the third thing is to provide examples. So if those first two don't work, or it's slightly off, then you just need to kind of look for cases where it's off, and then correct those cases and put them in as examples. So, you know, if it's not following the framework correctly, or if it doesn't quite get it, you can put even just one example will improve the performance by 20, 30% quite often. But, you know, typically I'll have like between 3 and 10 examples in my prompt, and maybe more if it's like a really important task. And that just kind of gives it something to go off, and it helps it. And you can make this an iterative process. So as you know, you start to notice more issues, you can then create examples for those issues and then put them back in, and it will get a little bit smarter every time.
And I feel like this is the way you can get into automation. Like for myself on the podcast, I initially started using AI to do certain steps of research and organizing thoughts and forming questions. And then I realized it's a bit of a pain to go through the process of doing this from scratch. So then I create like a saved prompt or a project that I can reuse again and again. And then I realized, okay, it's still a bit of pain logging in and like copying and pasting and doing this stuff. So now can I automate it with like Zapier or something similar? It's a great little progression where you can start off just doing things, and then if you do that thing frequently, you can automate it further and further.
100%. And even if you do know how to code, I still recommend you do it this way, because there's nothing worse than like coding the wrong thing, you know, and then having to redo it. So yeah, I usually try and do things manually myself a few times, and then once I know that that's working and that it is a task that I'm like doing again and again, I'm getting really tight on that feedback loop. And then once I feel like I've solved it, then I kind of move it over to Zapier, or if it's really important, then I'll create my own product. Yeah.
Love that. And you touched briefly on this idea of future-proofing prompts. One of the things I've noticed with some of these automations I have done is, I guess the model's changed, or maybe some subtle change in the model, and suddenly what used to give me good results is now not giving me such good results.
Yeah.
For instance, I have this one prompt that helps me to create interviews, and it started giving me interviews based on the example I provided rather than based on the new context that I put in. How do you handle changes in the model and the impact that has on your automations?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, that actually leads quite well into the fourth and fifth principles: evaluate and then divide. So one of the first things you need to do is, like, even if you get through the first three and now your prompt is working, it might stop working in the future, right? Or maybe your what you need changes, and you need to kind of figure that out, or something new becomes possible. So setting up good evaluation metrics, like we talked about with the LLM judge, like training that judge to check whether the response is good or not, or even kind of hard coding some. This is where it gets more into technical dev stuff, but like, I don't know, you can hard code specific things like blog post should be at least 1,000 words. And if it's not, then you know that test is failing, and you can see that. So like if the model suddenly starts refusing to do the task, then it'll be under 1,000 words, and you can catch that really quickly. And then once you have evaluation metrics, you can A/B test and see, okay, when I move from GPT-4 to GPT 4.5, is it better? Is it worse? But in a specific formal way, right? So you actually then know it's 20% better at this, but like 30% worse at that. And you can make adjustments. And then the fifth one, divide. Whenever the task becomes a bit too problematic because it's too complex, then what I try and do is like break it down into multiple steps. So with the blog post example, if you break that into 2 tasks and you say first, like, generate the outline, and then the second task, like the output of the outline from the first task, goes in as the input for the second task. So you're building a chain. You're chaining these different things together. And I find that the smaller the task, the less likely it is to break, because you can provide more examples, and it's only doing one thing, right? So it's not going to get confused. And even smaller, older models, cheaper models, more importantly, can do that task, right? So that's actually where like a lot of the work is once someone's in production, is like breaking down. Okay, like it's not doing this correctly, so let's split that out into a separate task, and it'll have its own evaluation. It'll have its own examples, etc. And then we'll bring the results back into the main thing. So that's where it starts to get really fun, because that can get very complex very quickly. And then that's where I think it becomes like real engineering, rather than just kind of being good at prompting.
Let's say I'm listening to this and I'm a content marketer who's very excited about having AI write my first drafts for me. How would you start? Like, let's say this piece of stringing together, write a outline and then write a first draft and now make an edited draft. How would you string those 3 prompts together for someone who's starting from scratch?
Yeah, good question. So you can do it manually at first. Typically, I would have, you could do it in ChatGPT, right? Like you could run one AI session, and then you could just ask the next question in the same session, and then ask the next question. I think that's the simplest chain, right? Like that's like like an in-session chain, let's call it. Then if you're finding that it's getting too big of a task, or it's kind of failing in some things, or it has too much context, like quite often that's a problem. Like the longer the prompt gets, the more it tends to misbehave and get confused. Just like humans, right? Like if you try to fit too much information or try to get them to do too many things, then they get confused. So then I would start a new chat session. And I have memory turned off, by the way, on ChatGPT, because I don't want it to know what else I've asked it, because that's another source of confusion and bias, right? So I would create like a new chat session. It's a whole new, it's like booting up a new human, right? Like it doesn't know anything about the world apart from what you're giving it. So you can control that environment. So then there'd be a lot of copy and pasting, and you get really tired of copy and pasting, but like you'd be doing your task in 10 minutes instead of 10 hours. So that's fine. But then you start to think about, okay, like now I'm going to be doing 100 of these instead of one per day. So then when you're doing 100 copy and paste a day, then you are like taking 10 hours copy and pasting. So at that point, that's when I'd move into like a low code or no code environment like Zapier. There's also N8N. I know a lot of people use make.com. I think is quite popular for this. And there's all these different tools where you can chain these things together. So, in Zapier, it'd be like, it's kind of doing the copy and pasting for you, and then it's dumping it into, as different steps in the chain, and it's dumping it into Google Docs or whatever at the end for you. So then you probably don't even need to get past that. But I would say if you get to the point where you're like, hey, this is working really well, but I want like other people to use this tool, that's when you might want to work with a developer or try and vibe code it yourself using Cursor. And then you would say like, hey, here's my Zapier, like here's what it does. Let me just explain what it does and what the different tools are. And then you have like a perfect brief essentially for either a human developer or an AI developer to go and build that for you.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
3 tiers. Start with just doing it. Second tier, automate it. And third tier, get a developer or vibe code it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds easier than it actually is, because you'll run into a bunch of errors and like edge cases where like it doesn't work in this scenario, right? Or like it does work here, but like only intermittently. So that a lot of the work is in that kind of janitorial effort of like cleaning things up, like kind of labeling examples, like putting good examples in, bad examples out, whatever. And yeah, so that's a lot of the hard work, to be honest. But the promise is that you can basically automate almost anything that you're working on.
Being that non-commissioned officer in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. You're fighting the battles.
How do you think about concerns that AI optimization could lead to homogeneity?
Yeah. I never know how to say this either. Yeah.
Too much sameness in marketing.
Yeah. So actually, funny enough, I'm wearing this like t-shirt. I don't know if you can see. Everything is a remix. If you know this.
True.
Yeah. So there's a really great YouTube video from, I think it's like 2005. Kirby Ferguson, shout out to him. He's a very early and great thinker on this. So he noticed that basically everything that we call creativity is really just remixing other sources. And the people that we think of as very creative, like Steve Jobs or Led Zeppelin or the Beatles, whatever, they're actually just dipping into sources that the general public don't know about. And so they're still remixing. They're just remixing things you haven't heard of, and therefore they seem original to you. And almost nothing is original if you trace the origins back. Either subconsciously or consciously, people are copying. And so I came into AI with that framing, and I was like, I really don't see the problem. Like, if AI is remixing stuff, like that's just what we do as well. Like, we are just kind of reading. Like, when a human artist goes to art school and they learn all the different techniques Monet used or whatever, is that really that different from, like, they'll go and in some respects they'll paint a little bit like Monet, but because they've learned those techniques. Is that different from like an AI, looking at every Monet in history and then being able to, prompt it for something that looks like Monet? Yeah, to me that they're quite similar. I would say though that the real problem comes from like lazy thinking. So there's two approaches to automation. Like when someone automates your job away, you have more free time to mess around. Or if you automate your own job away, it's the ideal situation, and don't tell your boss. Then I would say there's two things that could happen. Either one is you could be lazier, right? Like you could just work less, and that's fine, if people want to do that. But the other side is that you could actually work more. You could do more interesting stuff. Because now the hard part is done for you. So yeah, I would like to think that it will lead to more homogenization in that like the cycles will be quicker. Like as soon as someone comes up with a good idea now, you could have like 10 AI clones because people just, it's so easy to copy. But I would say that people will have more time to come up with the original ideas. So I said the cycle is quicker, but I don't think it's going to decrease the amount of originality in the world. I think if anything, it's going to explode it because you're going to have all these people who with more time on their hands to come up with interesting things. And I found this with my own writing. I automated all of my writing with GPT-3, and like it was a lot of hard work because GPT-3 was not a great model compared to what we have today. But once I did it, I kind of got a bit depressed because I actually really enjoyed writing, and people would ask me like, "Oh, how did you come up with the thing for this like post you did recently?" I'm like, I don't know. You have to remind me. I didn't write it. I have no idea. And so it was like passing the Turing test, and I was like, oh, it's pretty cool that I've done this, but also like, what am I going to do with my life? And it was scary. But the funny thing is, I'm actually writing more today than I ever have in the past. And I'm just writing about different things. So what I'm doing now is, if AI can write that topic already, then I don't approach it, because I just think it's a waste of time. Like if AI is already good at it, like it already has the training data. It doesn't need me to contribute my slop on top, right? But if I ask ChatGPT or Claude and I disagree with the response, then I'm like, okay, this is going to be a good post because I have some information that Claude doesn't, right? I have some alpha. I have some personal experience. So that's kind of the way I see it. Like I had a post where everyone in the world who's like an influencer, guru person, they like in the design space or in the agency space, they all tell you should do, you should do performance-based pricing or you value-based pricing, because they're like, don't sell your time, right? Like this is like everyone in this like kind of, I don't know if Tim Ferriss has ever said this, but like everyone who's read 4-Hour Workweek, they all talk about this.
We've all thought it. I don't know if he wrote it, but we all thought it.
Yeah, and my experience is I tried to do that with my agency, and it was absolutely terrible. Like we lost so much money doing value-based pricing because it turns out there are some things that people overvalue, and there are some things that people undervalue, right? Like people overvalue like Figma design, right? Because it's actually relatively easier for a good designer to do a good Figma design than it would be for the client to do it. So the client like overvalues that work, right? Like they're willing to pay 10 grand and the designer could do it for like the equivalent of $1 grand's worth of work, right? So you should use value-based pricing for that. But like setting up segment analytics on a website is something that clients perpetually undervalue. They think it should be easy, and they think like, what's the big deal? But it gets at the core of like why they exist as a business. Like if you don't understand exactly what the business does, you can't really design good tracking. So it's actually like incredibly hard to do. So they value that at $1 grand, but it's actually 10 grand's worth of work.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was like that's an example of like a unique insight that I had from my lived experience that ChatGPT disagrees with me on, right? And therefore it's an incredible post to write. You can still use ChatGPT to ghostwrite it, but like I get it to like interview me on that topic and I tell it like what I think. And then I have like a compelling blog post. So that's kind of the way I think about it. And now I write more than ever because I think about if I can run an experiment that gives a surprising result, or like if I can, go and live in the world and like come up with some experience that is different from what the consensus is saying, then that's like worthy of a post. And now I have more time to do that, to run those experiments. Then I'm actually writing much more than ever.
It's interesting because this ties back to what you said earlier in the interview, that money buys you freedom. In a similar way, automation also buys you freedom to go write the more interesting things, live the more interesting experiences.
Exactly.
And I think it also ties into something really important, not to go too nerdy on AI here, but the whole idea of universal basic income that people often talk about as the solution to AI replacing human jobs. It sort of falls flat in exactly this area. You need, as a human, you need meaning in life. And just having money in my pocket does not give me what I need for human flourishing, which is something that I feel like actually matters. Continuing in this area of, so Rally, you're solving a lot of research and making that easier and faster for people to do. What other marketing roles or tasks do you think AI will be uniquely well suited to help?
Yeah, good question. I would say synthesis. So whenever you have a situation where there's a lot of information out there and you need to condense it down to a pithy quote or like a presentation for your boss or whatever, it's just really great at that. So like I use Google LM Notebook quite often because you can dump like so much information in there, and then you can click generate and it'll make like a podcast of two people talking about that information. So whenever I have like a scientific paper I needed to read, like we started this off talking about how I felt like I was too dumb to work in AI. And that's probably still true, but I now I would never read scientific papers before because it would just be boring, or like I wouldn't understand what they're talking about. And now I can go in Notebook LM, generate a podcast of that paper, and I can like go on a walk and listen to them talking about the paper. And I'm not getting the same information content as if I read the paper, but I can decide pretty quickly in that 7-minute podcast, like how much deeper do I need to go into this? So sometimes now I'll actually go back into the paper and really read it. Because now I'm coming in excited because I like understand what the promise of reading the paper is, if that makes sense. So I would say like that's like one of the main ones that comes to mind.
A lot like, I feel like for me anyway, it's a lot like putting sugar on my broccoli. That I know I need to eat this broccoli, but I don't want to. With AI, I can put a little bit of sugar on it and then I'll eat it. And I find for myself, I don't do a lot of podcasts, although Notebook LM is fantastic for that. But I like reading more. And so what I'll normally do is like copy paste the paper in and then say, redo this in the style of The Morning Brew, which is a fantastically easy to read newsletter. And then it summarizes it quite well. And you can go back and forth with it and be like, hey, where does this statistic come from? Was their methodology sound? And similar to what you said about taking sort of vibes from other people, sometimes if it's a medical paper, for instance, I'll say, evaluate this in the style of Peter Tia, who's fairly good at analyzing medical studies. And then it gives me like the pros and cons and helps me to understand it more effectively. Coming back to marketing, what are the roles in marketing that you think won't be helped by AI or will be particularly human even 10 years into the future?
Yeah, good question. It's funny because I don't think people give enough credit to machine learning in the marketing field. But I still remember when in my first marketing job, it was a company called Efficient Frontier. They got bought by Adobe in the end, but there was like a PPC bidding algorithm, right? And what they did was, at the time, everyone was doing manual bidding. So you'd have a whole room of people in Excel, like calculating how to set the bid for each keyword, right?
Wow.
Like 30 people in a room, right? And what Efficient Frontier did was we just had an algorithm that did that, used portfolio theory. And it could tell you, like, based on your budget, based on your performance goals, like what bids should you set across all your keywords. And that reduced the room from 30 people down to 10, because then you're just really doing creative and account structure and some manual optimization. And today you didn't even need that because Facebook, Google, they can do a very good job of setting the bids for you anyway. And there are also nuances, like in some cases, it might make sense to still bid manually. But I would say by and large, like 99% of the work that used to be done in Excel spreadsheets is now just done automatically for free. And so we've already been through this, right? Like we already eliminated those jobs, but like nobody is out of work in marketing, as far as I can tell. Like every single person I used to work with who did manual bidding, like they all got jobs, right? Like they all just ended up in management and stuff. So I have a lot of hope for that because we've been through it already, and it really wasn't that disruptive for us, at least in marketing. And so that also gives us the direction of travel. We went from it being really important to be scientific and like be able to do math in Excel to it being like much more important to be creative.
Yeah.
So like we went from like, I wasn't really doing that much ad copy testing at all until all this stuff was automated, and then I had to learn it. And then with my agency, we were incubated by a creative agency called BBH. They're part of Publicis Group. So
They're awesome.
Yeah, cool. Like they have the black sheep logo because they're the one that invented that Levi's ad when the world zag, and it's just like one it's like one black sheep going the other way with all the white sheep going this way, and it was like iconic, and it was like 35 years ago or something, right? So like very old storied agency, really really cool, and just learning how they did stuff, try seeing how they did it, and there's somewhere in the middle, like I feel like they're doing like brand stuff that they can't tell you how it works every time, right? Because it's pretty hard to do attribution on brand campaigns. But then we were doing like hardcore attribution stuff and the performance marketing. And I've kind of drifted more towards their way of thinking over time as like the automated kind of analytic stuff gets taken. So I'd say anything that's like not easy to quantify is where we're going to hide out from the AIs. I think brand campaigns are going to be back in fashion. It's going to be like Mad Men, a new golden age. I feel like, there's going to be much more focus on sales. I think a lot of marketing people are going to get into sales because it's going to be more and more important to be able to like have a human connection with your client rather than just kind of trying to automate everything through HubSpot. And I think copywriting, classic. It's the oldest job in marketing and still still the most stable. I would say that it needs to actually be copywriting though. I think content marketing itself is going to be pretty hard to sustain. The way I see it, so like the old days where we would pump out, like 30, 500 word blog posts about random topics that we found on Ahrefs, like those days are gone. Like nobody reads that stuff anymore, and AI can write it better than the people you outsource to in the Philippines. And they're using AI anyway, right? So it's I would say like that whole thing is gone. But where I would see a content marketer of the future is if you retrain yourself to think more like a journalist, where you're going out and finding the story, like you're interviewing the people on the factory floor, and you're talking to the people who like have the real world experience, and then you're capturing that and then putting that into the LLM. I think like that's where the job is. Like you don't actually have to write the content anymore, but like that you do need someone. Like there are people with good stories, and there are people that like but they're not very good at sharing them. So I think it is a good role. And like what you're doing with this podcast, right? In the same kind of vein. You provided some sort of structure, some format, some incentive for people with like interesting stories for your audience to like come and tell them. So I think like that's where it's going. Like if you can find people with authentic stories, and then it doesn't really matter whether AI writes it up for you or not. Like I think that's a really key job.
I love that. It's like gold mining. You don't need to be the person who uses mercury to separate the gold from the rock anymore.
Yeah.
But you do still need to go find where the gold is and then put it into the machine.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be out there panning in the rivers and stuff.
Exactly. Okay, I want to go back really quickly to something you mentioned earlier, which is the creation of storylines. And you briefly mentioned presentations. Have you seen any good AI that can actually make a presentation or like a slide deck?
Yeah, good question. I found that pretty cringeworthy.
Same.
Out of the box.
Same.
So I don't really use it for that purpose. I have heard some developers talking about slide dev because it's a way to create slides directly from like Markdown, I think. And therefore you could create a presentation in Cursor, like through code. I have this general feeling that like Cursor is just going to eat the world because like I'm seeing people write blog posts in Cursor now and now making presentations. I feel like the ability to code is is just like a superpower that we've given AI, and it might just end up taking over everything. And you're like, the only software you use is Cursor. But
which is the beauty of
it's pretty nuts.
APIs. It allows you to
Yeah,
use text to do things that previously would be click here, click there, and now you can use text to do it, which
exactly. And
brings
all the stuff
AI
we
into
talked
the
about
mix.
with Zapier and stuff, right? Like, as Cursor gets more stable, you could just do that. Like, you have the MCP, which is the thing from Anthropic, which just lets it talk to different services. And you could go in Cursor today. You could say, connect to my HubSpot. Tell me like what leads are like the oldest that haven't been talked to, and then draft like a few emails for me to send to those people. Like you can do that today. So I feel like that's something where you'll see like maybe that's another role of like almost like a product manager / engineer who's like kind of doing marketing operations through something like Cursor.
It's an exciting, very exciting new world. We have so little time, and you have so many fascinating things that you've done in your life. I'd love to briefly touch on some of what you did at your agency at Ladder. You worked with major companies like, I believe, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Facebook, and you also worked with a bunch of startups. What would you say were the biggest differences you observed between how marketing functioned?
Yeah, good question. I'll tell you, our experience was a little bit different in that we were never like the agency of record for any of these big companies. We were always working with their innovation labs. So it's good to get the logos, but they wanted to be like startups too, Like, so I would say the major difference, funnily enough, is that the people of the big companies were much better, well-versed in startup literature. Like they knew, like they'd seen every YC video, they'd read every Brian Balfour post, like they knew this stuff really well. And I think it's partly because like they wanted to work in these big companies and for the stability, but they also like really wanted to start their own thing at some point. And so they had more time, I guess, to like really dig deep into understand the literature. The people in the startups were much harder to work with because quite often we had to like educate them and on like how to do stuff and how we could unblock certain things and how important certain types of campaigns were. So we actually stopped working with the earlier stage startups. Like we initially we were charging only $2,000 a month when I first launched. So we were affordable for idea stage startups, like even pre-seed, and it almost like destroyed me. The startup is your baby, right? Like, and if if something bad happens, then you look for someone to blame. And even though like I did this analysis once, something like 9 out of 10 startups fail, but we found that only 6 out of 10 startups failed for us. So we actually improved the odds. But like, was anyone happy with that? No, because still the startup failed. So and if the startup succeeded, they would also like want to build an empire, so they would like bring it in house. So I would say it's actually like really. I think agencies they should start with startups if you need to get some experience or to collect some case studies. But like as soon as possible, almost everyone moves upstream and tries to work with bigger companies because they're just more reliable clients. They already have a business that's validated. It's not your fault if something goes wrong because you're not like that important to the overall machine.
Yeah, that's super fair. My wife and I recently went through renovation, or we're still going through renovation here in Singapore. And we found very similarly in the contractor market, the really good contractors don't want to work with individual people and they go work for enterprise. And the not so good contractors are the ones who are still open to individual customers. So you need to find them early or just get used to working with someone who may not be as easy to work with.
Yeah, exactly. You need to find, like, we found this with our hiring as well. We were purposefully looking for people who are undervalued by the market because they had like a non-traditional career path or, they were tough to work with in some ways. Like that would be great for us. Like if we knew what the flaw was, then we could work on that. And because we couldn't afford like people who already knew who were already good and knew their value, right? You kind of had to like, one of the best people we ever hired, a guy called Ed. Like, I think he was, I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story, but like he was like a fry cook in Philadelphia at one point, I think. And then he did a Startup Institute boot camp. That's where we met him. And he quickly became like the most liked person in the whole cohort. And everyone was like, you should talk to Ed, like you should hire Ed. He had his insane amount of talent. And we managed to get him, and he was promoted like three times, I think, in 2.5 years, and ended up like now he's like running marketing at a startup. But yeah, like I still remember this is kind of crazy. He was like, when will I get the decision? Because it was like on a Friday. He did the interview, and he smashed it. And he was like, when would I get the decision? And I was like, oh, okay. Well, we're hoping like maybe next week. That's pretty fast, like for a recruitment process. He was like, well, if I don't find out tomorrow, then I have to like move back to Philly.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was, he'd really put it out there. He's like living his credit card. So I just talked to my co-founder. I was like, let's just hire him, man, because he's awesome. So we're like, okay, yeah, you start Monday, you know. So yeah, it's crazy. Like I think there are people out there like that who are just like gems, and for whatever reason, they just like haven't built the credibility yet to be able to, you know, get what they're worth. And our pitch was like, basically, you're going to like cram 5 years experience into 1 year. Every single person that left, like whether they had a good experience or a bad experience, they would say, yeah, you weren't lying about that. We had people go on to be CMOs and startups, like people go on to be VPs, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was about kind of finding the people with like who had been overlooked. You know, I think like that's really the key.
And you, by the way, had a genius approach to hiring. How did you land on this? Like, if I understand correctly, you signed up to be an instructor at a boot camp, mainly just to hire people out of the boot camp. Yeah, how did that go for you? And how did you land on it?
So I am an introvert. I might not come across that way doing podcast interviews, but like I learned how to like pretend to be an extrovert strategically when I need to. And so like I didn't like sales. I wasn't great at events and things like that. So what I did was I joined up this boot camp, Startup Institute, as a marketing instructor. That gave me a little bit of runway while I was trying to land clients. We had a couple of clients straight away, but you know, it was just barely enough, and it was tenuous. And then I hired the smartest person out of the class, and he was really extroverted. Like just like everyone loved him. Like he went to all these events. And he went around and like basically he would just intro me to people. So I'd go to an event with him and he'd be like, have you met Mike? You know, so it's a bit like the dating scene, but you know, he was like my Barney, you know. But yeah, so that kind of really got us going. His name was Wilton. And yeah, he was really instrumental. And then we got enough clients to be able to hire more people. So the next cohort of students, I hired the smartest person in that class, and that was John Brody, who ended up, now he's the CEO. So like, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. When my original co-founder left, like, I was like, do you want the job? Because like, I don't want to be CEO, but I am CEO of Rally. So this is a little bit different for me this time. I think because it's a product company, it's a little bit easier to manage than doing agency sales, you know, but yeah, it's a lot of fun when you figure out these hacks and you can kind of, I think the first 14 people we hired were through Startup Institute. And then from there, we had like a really solid core and we could get referrals. And when we knew exactly what type of people we wanted, so we could do like a proper recruitment process after that.
It's incredible. And goes back again to that creativity of what can humans provide when AI does a lot of this other stuff. It is the creativity. What AI is going to think of
like
working
that's
at
an
boot camp.
NCO. Yeah, that's an NCO decision, right? Like an AI, like if you asked an AI, how would I build a marketing agency in New York, it would come up with a completely different answer than what I came up with. You know, so I think like that's the type of decision that like people are still going to be great at. It's like filling in the blanks where like by all means you shouldn't have succeeded, and you found some like stupid hack to like get around the system.
That is brilliant. And on the other side, so that's a lot of like how you found your people. How did you find your clients? And I think you sort of mentioned earlier in the interview, a lot of it was blog posts. What were the other ways that you found clients?
Yeah. So initially it was going to those events and we got like a few clients that way. Actually, the funny thing that most people don't realize about events is you almost never meet your actual clients there. You meet people who intro you to the clients. So
like
you can
people
just relax.
At the client company or people who...
So like basically people who know people who need help. So like that's the thing I realized. So you can just relax at these events. You don't have to do the hard sell. Just talk about what you're passionate about. And you know, so like you'd meet someone and they'd tell them what you're doing. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I do Facebook ads, you know, whatever. And they'd be like, oh, I have a buddy who runs a business who needs help with Facebook ads. So I think like that we got most of the way with that initial approach. And then when we started blogging, that's when it really started to take off, because then it's like, it's that referral, but like on steroids. Because again, this is something I think a lot of people get wrong about content marketing. We got 60% of our leads from the blog, but 90% of our leads mentioned the blog when we talked to them. So they'd all heard about the blog. And even the people that came directly from the blog, when we talked to them, they would say, a friend of mine, I was talking to him and he said I needed help. with my Facebook ads, I was doing the wrong thing. So I checked out your blog to see what I was doing wrong. And then I thought, this is too hard. I'm just going to hire you guys. So again, it's like the blog post is not like, people always say you should write for decision makers. And I think that that's crap. Like, decision makers are too busy to do this, or to read your blog. What they do is they go and they ask their friend who's good at Facebook ads, and who do you recommend? And that person would read our blog, and they would be like, Ladder really knows what to do.
That's really interesting. I was reading a tweet earlier today that said the number one thing, in classic Twitter hyperbole, the number one thing that the ultra wealthy people do is hire someone who's already put in 1,000 hours rather than put in the 1,000 hours, the 10,000 hours themselves, which, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I think it is a really good way of approaching things. Like, can you find the person who's done these reps rather than wasting the time doing it wrong yourself? And similarly, if you're trying to find a client, they're looking for that person. Can you meet that person and have them introduce you to the client instead?
Exactly. Yeah. And referrals don't have to be sleazy or salesy, right? Like people, you're actually doing them a favor by being someone they're excited to recommend. And that's the biggest reframe is that, like, there are people in the world who kind of great at networking, and the way that they remain relevant to their network is by just always knowing a guy who does this, or knowing a lady who has this experience, right? And therefore you're a benefit to them, right? Like, that's what people don't realize. Like, they'd sell you for free because they're like, now I have someone who I know is good at Facebook ads. Now like, whenever anyone has any trouble with Facebook ads, I can go, I know someone who's great, meet Mike.
100%. It's great for everyone involved, and for the client. I need someone who's good at Facebook ads. I'm super excited to find a company that can help me with that.
Yeah, I mean, take it out of marketing for a second. Like, if you're like, my pipes just burst in the kitchen, like, what do you call your father-in-law and say, like, do you know any good plumbers, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't care, like, about it. I just need to know, does this person call themselves a plumber, and, like, does someone refer them, right? So like, everyone is benefiting. Like, the plumber's getting work, the father-in-law, like, does you a favor, so, like, feels a stronger connection there, and yeah, so it's like, it's great for everyone. And that, I think, like, when you try and force it, that's when it gets sleazy or salesy, and you don't have to do that.
So true. It reminded me rather of some friends of my family back in the US who moved recently, and they were telling my parents the hardest thing about moving is they no longer know who's the right HVAC person, who's the right plumber, who's the right electrician in this new area. Having that connection is a huge, huge benefit.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the conclusion of the interview. Thank you for making the time. This has been wide-ranging and a lot of fun. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so Rally's website is at askrally.com. You can sign up for the waitlist there. Also, I'm on Twitter a bunch, too much, if you ask my wife. Hammer_MT is my Twitter link. So check that out if you want to, my mid takes on random topics.
I love it. And all of that will be in the show notes below. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.